Hey, it's Aaron. Today I have a question from Marty. Marty wants to know, how do I avoid auto repair scams? And then he tells a story about going to the mechanic and a simple $100 job turning into 1,500 bucks. And anyway, the gist is there are common auto repair scams, and some of them can be avoided, and then some things that seem like a scam aren't actually a scam. It's worth noting that for the most part, the auto shops and auto repair technicians that you go and see, they're on the up and up. Most of them are not out there to just rip you off. That's a kind of common misnomer that's really hard to shake, because there's those bad apples that make the whole barrel look bad. The general rule of thumb you should go by when you're going to an automotive place, or anywhere else for that matter, is if it feels like a scam, it probably is, and you should walk away. That's even if it turns out to not have been a scam and you go somewhere else and they tell you the same thing. If your initial reaction is that it feels scammy, you should just walk away from it. You can always go to another shop and find out the same thing or something else by going there. So that's the first rule of thumb I can give you, and it's the thing that I would emphasize the most. The other thing is, if you ask for a second opinion, if you say, look, I want to take my car to another guy and get a second opinion on this, if the mechanic gets really huffy about that and unhappy, you shouldn't be at that mechanic anyway. Most mechanics should be more than happy to say, you know what, I know I'm legit, so take it wherever and find out. That's if they get angry about it, it's probably not the place you want to be anyway. Mechanics, if they're good, are not hard up for work. They have plenty of work to do. You leaving and not giving them the work is not really going to affect them that much. They're not losing money because they got another car lined up right behind you just waiting. So a mechanic that gets angry about a request for a second opinion probably isn't a mechanic you want to be at. Now, one of the things that was brought up was lug nut replacement. So they were asked, do you have to replace your lug nuts every 10,000 miles? This is a question that came from somebody else. This was not Marty's question. This was a guy named Brett Moline. And he sent the question asking because he went to a Ford dealership and they told him he needed to replace his lug nuts. Now, the 10,000 mile thing is a very specific number that seems a little odd. I would say 10,000 miles is some number that somebody made up. I had never seen a lug nut replacement interval in a owner's manual, and I don't think that they exist. Now, do lug nuts need to be replaced? Yes, they do. Over time, lug nuts will swell, usually because they've been over tightened, which is common with air guns that everybody uses to run them. They've been slightly over tightened or under tightened. They have rust and they have other things. So the lug nuts do need replacement, but there's no interval for that. Usually if they're just a little too hard to get off or a little too hard to line up to get back on, they probably should be replaced. And lug nuts are not expensive. So it's not like it's going to cost you a bunch of money to replace them, especially if you just have your own. So that's the caveat. The dealership will replace them at a premium, or you can just go buy them off the shelf somewhere and replace them like that. But lug nut replacement, it is a thing, but I've never heard of an interval for it. So I would be a little sketch if somebody told me that there's a 10,000 mile interval for it. One of the ones that Marty did bring up was a transmission flush. So when he took his vehicle in, they told him that he needed a transmission and a cooling system flush. Now, these are fairly common and routine things that kind of get pushed on you because it's really easy to start upselling once the shop gets you to agree to having these things done, they then start upselling you on additive products or better fluids or whatever. So it's a quick upsell. So a $150 flush can turn into $300 if they can upsell you on the other stuff. It's a similar thing happens with oil changes. You go in and they tell you, well, we can put in the ultra premium, blah blah blah. It makes it sound like if you don't use this, you're not taking care of your car, but it costs twice as much as the standard oil that they were going to use. So, you know, it's not really a scam, but it is a scam in a way, depending on how you want to define the word scam. So there are intervals for these things. Your owner's manual has an interval for transmission flush, if it has one at all. A lot of today's vehicles do not have a transmission flush. It's a lifetime fluid in the transmission. It should not be flushed, and there probably isn't a way to actually flush it. And then the cooling system, that will have, so your antifreeze basically, so your coolant will have an interval, and it's not always recommended that it be flushed. So a flush means that they send fluid through to clean out the system, and then they put new fluid in after they've drained it, right? So you drain it, flush it by squirting fluid through or sending fluid under slight pressure through to clean it out, and then you cap it all off and you fill it. A lot of manufacturers do not recommend a flush, so make sure that you know, just look at your manual, it's in there, make sure that you know whether or not a flush is required. Much of the time, you just need to drain and replace. And if that's the case, it's a much cheaper service and you'll save some money. So make sure you know, and like I said, it's in your owner's manual. One of the things that I would, one of the things Marty said was that they wanted to replace his brakes, and they said that one of his rotors needed to be replaced. With brakes, it's always good to err on the side of caution. So if they say that you need brakes, you probably, in at least some way, do. It's a question of how much and whether or not it's imminent. This is something I would always get a second opinion on. Unless you totally trust this mechanic and they've always been fair with you in the past, I would go to a different shop and get a second opinion on that. The reason being that one mechanic's eyeball of what you have versus another may not be the same, and sometimes you're close to but not needing that replacement, and they're just recommending it. If you go to the same place, say for an oil change, so you're in there every 3 months or however often you have to change your oil, and they tell you that you're going to need a brake replacement, ask them if that means you need it done before your next oil change interval, or if it just is right now. If they can't tell you either one of those, then I wouldn't have it done there. I would go somewhere else. The reason I say that is because most mechanics should be able to look at your pads, look at your braking system as a whole, look at your rotors and so on, and be able to tell you about how long you have left based on your wear patterns, right? So I would only trust them if they can tell you about how long you probably have left. And they can just look at your oil change interval and know, yeah, you come in for an oil change every 3 months, you got 2 months left here, that kind of thing. If you're one of those people that only goes in once a year for an oil change, you're not putting very many miles on your vehicle. You probably do not need brakes right away. Unless it's super bad, and in that case they can show you that it's bad and it will be totally obvious to you that it's bad. If your rotor has ripples in it and you can visually see those, if your brake pads are worn all the way down and there's almost to that little metal thing that's going to start scraping to tell you to change them, if it's something like that, then of course you need those changed. But I would recommend that if you're unsure, you go get a second opinion, you take it somewhere else. Tires are the same thing. Now, Marty didn't mention tires, but tires are the same thing here. If your tires aren't really that worn down, and it's not coming up on like winter where you're going to need more traction or something, then most likely them telling you that you need new tires is something that you can go and check at another shop, because tires aren't always as bad as a mechanic says they are. Most will err on the side of caution because they want to be safe with you. They want you to be safe, but you should double check it. And I would especially double check it if they tell you you need new tires and we happen to have these on sale or whatever, because that feels like way more of an upsell than it does a actual need. So always double check with tires as well. One very common scam that you really should always be on the lookout for are what's called double charges. That's where they charge you for a set amount of labor, no matter how much overall work is being done. A good example of this is, let's say you're getting your timing belt changed, and they say, hey, while we're doing that, we should do the water pump and and they make you a little list of common things that now that they're already in there, they could also do just as preventative maintenance. If they charge you full price for a water pump replacement, so they're charging you all the labor involved, which is about 2/3 of that labor is the labor they already did to get to the timing chain. If they're charging you for all of that for all of these things, you're getting scammed, because they should be lowering the amount of mechanic hours required, man hours required for these other things, because you're already getting in there. Most of them will have, most places, if they're legitimate, they will have a bundle, and they'll say, okay, if we do the timing belt and then at the same time we do this, this, and this, the total cost is this, and it will be a pretty reasonable number. So if it's, let's say it's $1,500 for the timing belt, and then they'll say swap these other two out, we've got another hour of man hour time, and then the parts, and so they'll say overall we'll do the whole thing for $2,000, if or $1,800 or whatever number. If they're giving you a bundle price, it's probably legitimate. But again, ask for that estimate and look at the estimate and make sure that they're not overcharging you on man hours before you agree to the job, because this is a very common thing. It's a good way to kind of bolster the income of the shop, and it's not illegal, so it's totally it's totally legitimate to do this legally, but it is ripping you off, so just make sure. Finally, just on my end, this is stuff that I can tell you that it was not asked by anybody. When you go in for like an oil change or routine maintenance, and they try to upsell you on things like your cabin air filter, your engine filter, windshield wiper replacements, things like that, always just refuse that. And the reason I tell you that is because no matter how mechanically inept you are, these are things you can do yourself. They do not require tools. I have yet to find a cabin air filter that requires a tool. And if they do require a tool, the most it's going to require is a Phillips head screwdriver, and I guarantee you have one of those somewhere. So those are things that are very easy to figure out. You can jump onto YouTube. I've done a few myself where it shows how to do that. So you can, you know, how to get to the cabin air filter and stuff. My average time for changing out a cabin air filter, and I am not a technician, I am not ASE certified, and I do not do this every day, but my average time for swapping out a cabin air filter is 1 minute. It is that easy. As far as the engine compartment, so the engine air filter, my average time on that is 2 minutes, and that's just because I got to feel around to figure out where the latch is to lift the hood up. It is a really easy thing to do. Windshield wipers, you can do a set of windshield wipers. If you've got 2 on your car, you can easily swap those out in maybe 10 minutes tops. Most of the time it'll be around 5. Now some of these things you don't even have to do them or pay for somebody to do them. If you pull up to the auto parts store and you go in and buy that stuff and you say, hey, can you show me how to put this in? 9 times out of 10 they'll come out and do it for you, especially those windshield wipers. So yeah, these are things that if you do it, you might spend $20 to $40 for that filter, but at the shop they're going to charge you $100 to swap that out. There's no reason to pay that extra money because it's really easy to just do it yourself. So that's my biggest way to avoid auto repair scams. Learn what you can do on your own and just do it, because a lot of stuff is super easy. And if you watch, if you have like, one of my recommendations, if you have the chance to do this, take your vehicle to one of those places where you sit in it while they do the oil change or whatever, and just watch what they're doing. Because when they do things like your cabin filter and other stuff, you'll be like, holy crap, that was easy. And when you try it for yourself, you'll be like, yeah, I should totally be doing that myself. There's a lot of little things like that on your car that you can do that way. So yeah, that's it. There aren't a whole ton of really common auto repair scams. Most of them are upsells, or it's the mechanic not knowing what's wrong and just kind of throwing parts at it. So they just kind of tell you, yeah, we're gonna need this, this, and this, and then they're just kind of throwing parts at the problem to see if something happens to fix it. That's pretty rare with today's diagnostics and so on. They usually can figure out the problem pretty quickly, but on older vehicles you'll see a lot of just throwing parts at it because they know the problem is happening between this point and this point, so everything in between that could be the problem. So they'll just start throwing parts. So yeah, that's what I got. Hopefully this helps you. If you have any auto repair scams that you've run into, go ahead and throw those in the comments down there. There's a lot of them. But for the most part, these are probably the major ones you're going to run into, and the ones that you can avoid either by doing it yourself or by just getting a second opinion. So that's what I got. That's it. I know this was a pretty long video, but there was a lot to cover. So, all right, if you got a question, you can hit me up. Comment down below, find me on Facebook, Twitter, wherever else. I did an article about this on Cowboy State Daily. I'll link to that as well. So yeah, that's what I got. This has been Aaron. Talk to you again soon.